And I just am going to. So last week we did a little bit of a tour on some of Earth's cycles, and learned a little bit more about like the additional, except for the I'll backtrack now. So many of you all knew about the water cycle. A lot of this is covered in a lot of the schools that we get to, but we never really meet some of the other Earth cycles that are just as important, or almost as, I think, it's not a competition between importance on the cycles. They're all important. Water cycle is absolutely critically important, but the carbon cycle is also very, very important. And then we learned about two other cycles that are part of the Earth's systems, and that is the phosphorus and nitrogen cycles. And one of the reasons why the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles are so important to life as a whole is because nitrogen and phosphorus have often been a limiting factor for life. They were a limiting factor in terms of life's ability to grow, repopulate, increase its population. And Earth has its own ways of creating additional phosphorus and nitrogen and putting it into the system. A lot of the time, it kind of stems from erosion of mountains that creates a huge amount of releases from those mountains that have stored nitrogen and phosphorus in it. And then as it gets into the water system, that breaks down, and that nitrogen and phosphorus now becomes available to a life in the oceans, life in the water, and then also on land too, especially when there's flood conditions, and it puts a lot of that debris on the land. And that is one of the reasons why we find so many of our civilizations, human civilizations, started out around riverbeds. Yes, because of water, absolutely, but also because of the huge amounts of nutrient loading that would take place in those areas during flood conditions of the water. And you'll find a lot of the times the stories, like in the civilization of Egypt, how important the flooding of the Nile was to sustaining human life in those regions. Same thing in the Indus Valley, and same thing in the Mesopotamia area with with Tigris and Euphrates rivers as well. All of these human civilizations, if you look at it, stemmed around these river systems that were so critically important into providing nutrient loading that would make agriculture far more viable for civilizations and large amounts of populations. Then something happened in the Industrial Revolution, and human beings figured out how to take out a whole bunch of stored fossil fuels that was hidden in the ground, take it up, dig it up, and then burn it for us to create our own energy needs. And we've been dealing with that since. So I did want to kind of do a little bit of an introduction. I just found a few videos I'd like to share with you, just because I think it's a fascinating story on how coal was created in the first place. So we're going to go back into a little bit of a story and go back in time to the Carboniferous time. So I'm just going to share my screen, and we're going to go into our little time machines, and we are going to go back 350 million years and see what the hell was going on in that Carboniferous time that created all of this coal that we've been digging up for the last number of years. So bear with me. I am going to share my screen. I am going to pull up this one. And this is, which is screen number 2? A sec, sorry. Gotta remember which one. Ah, found it. All right. All right. Going back in time.
in the world was made at the same time. It was all made during one brief period of geological history. It started abruptly 360 million years ago, and it stopped abruptly 300 million years ago. Like, if you drill a hole into the ground, you'll pass through geological layers or strata. It's like traveling back in time, and eventually you'll reach the coal strata. And that strata is in the same position everywhere around the world because all the coal in the world was made at the same time. But why? Well, to understand, you need to know about the nutrient cycle. Plants pull nutrients from the soil and from the air and combine them into larger molecules that they use to live. And then when plants die, they decompose. Those larger molecules break down into smaller molecules, and those nutrients are returned to the soil so that new plants can grow and use them. Except that plants can't decompose on their own. You need to bring in these decomposers, basically fungi and bacteria that are good at breaking down these larger structures into small nutritious pieces that return to the soil, and they derive some energy from that, and that's how they live. So that's the nutrient cycle. So let's go way back in time to a period before there were trees. So there are plants, but there aren't trees yet. And some plant comes along that figures out or invents through the process, I'm anthropomorphizing, but through the process of evolution, they come up with the ability to make some molecules called lignins. And lignins are a revolution. They're amazing. They're these structural molecules. They're the molecules that give trees their strength. It's the essence of wood. And they confer an amazing advantage on the plants that can produce lignins. And so this ability spreads all around the world really quickly. Suddenly you've got woody plants and trees everywhere. It's actually quite a good analogy for the human invention of plastic. It's like, wow, this is amazing. Let's just put it in everything. And then, oh my God, why won't it go away? So these lignins are novel. Nothing has been seen like it before on Earth. And it's novel to the fungi and bacteria as well. They've never seen anything like it. They don't know how to decompose it. So these new trees, when they die and fall over, they just lie there. The bacteria and the fungi look at it and go, I don't know what to do with these lignins. Never seen it before. And so these dead trees just pile up on top of each other, they get squished. It sticks around for long enough, undecomposed by fungi and bacteria that don't know what to do with it, that it turns into fossils. It turns into coal. And then 60 million years later, some bacteria or fungus figures out, through the process of evolution, how to break down lignins. And again, it's a revolution. It confers an amazing advantage onto the bacteria and fungi that can do it because it's a new source of food. So it spreads like wildfire around the world and essentially cuts off the production of coal. It's probably my favorite example of the way that the geological layers of the Earth can tell us interesting stories about our ancient history. But here's a related question. Where does a tree come from? Like, where does the mass of a tree come from? And you might think, well, trees grow out of the ground, so the mass of a tree is slowly pulled out of the ground as it grows. But that's not true. Like, a tiny bit of the mass of a tree comes from the ground, but most of it comes from the air because most of a tree is made of carbon. So trees draw carbon dioxide through their leaves, and it pulls the carbon dioxide molecules apart, separates into carbon and oxygen. It holds onto the carbon, it adds it to the structure of its body, and it releases the oxygen as a gas. And that process is driven by energy from the sun. So in a sense, a tree is locking up solar energy into those carbon bonds by separating the carbon from oxygen. And that's why coal is such an effective fuel, because if you want to release that locked up solar energy, all you have to do is reunite the carbon inside with the oxygen in the air that it was separated from in the first place. And that's what we do. We burn coal to produce carbon dioxide. And that's a problem. We know this. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and climate change is a real problem. So what do we do? Well, we can, and I believe we should, try to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that we produce. But maybe at the same time, we should be looking at ways to draw carbon dioxide out of the air in the way that trees do. In fact, maybe we should be planting trees.
I'm going to stop there just because I think that's enough of the story that I wanted to share in terms of how coal was made from during the Carboniferous time period. I'll do a little bit of these introductions on this one as well. Maybe next week, next week, we're going to kind of like, well, then where did all that oil come from? How was that made? And then we're going to talk about a little bit, like, this is all about taking carbon that was part of life forms and that got buried without being decomposed, and all stored all of that carbon in that rock layer. And now we're taking all of that over strata out of the way, bringing up all of those fossil fuels that have been stored for hundreds of millions of years, and then burning it, produce energy for our own purposes, with the consequences associated with the carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions that relates. But I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a sense on, like, where did all this fossil fuel come from? And how come it's such an issue with regards to messing with the carbon cycle as the Earth's carbon cycle? All right, any questions that came from that video?
No, but it was cool.
It is very cool. I think it is like the ability to go back in time and see what the hell was going on hundreds of millions of years ago. All right. So another thing I wanted to share as well, I haven't been doing land acknowledgements as part of this, and I will put my kind of a little bit on the thing. I feel a little sometimes uncomfortable doing land acknowledgements because I sometimes feel like it's such a superficial kind of thing to do. But I'm calling in from the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe, the Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And it's now known as Hamilton, and that's where I'm calling in from. And it is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt. And one of the things I wanted to share, because I've been using this, like, each time I do a land acknowledgement, because I feel so superficial doing land acknowledgements, I've been using it as an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous history, and try and educate myself on this one. And I ended up coming across this one poem that I just found so wonderful that I wanted to share with everybody. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. And I appreciate you guys indulging me.
The Mississauga Nation welcomed settlers from across the seas when they arrived in their territories. Such beauty revealed before their eyes was beyond their ability to describe. In all the languages that the settlers spoke, there were no words that could evoke with any clarity a single thought that Mother Nature's splendor brought. It was from the indigenous tongues that the settlers learned the language of the earth in all her idioms. Toronto from Takaranto, trees standing in the water, a meeting place where small fish could gather. Nearby hills where alders grow, that was called Etobicoke. And in the autumn before the winter snow, the passenger pigeons rested in Mimico. And to the west, where the great waters flow, the lake and lands were called Ontario. Eagles soar high, and with prayers for Manitou, the Mississauga people smudge and launch their birchbark canoes. Three sisters, corn, bean, and squash. The planting season has begun. Tobacco is offered a gift to grandfather's son. Sage, sweetgrass, and cedar to grandmother moon. There is peace, joy, and harmony in the treaty lands called A Dish with One Spoon.
So thank you so much for indulging me. I get goosebumps with that poem, and I just loved it. So I wanted to share it. And sorry, I'm going to turn that off now. Right. And I also wanted to first of all find out, as we went through the last week's course, learning about the carbon cycle, phosphorus cycle, nitrogen cycle, any questions that kind of came to mind for people? No? Okay, then I have some homework. One of the things I'd like to kind of give everybody some homework, and this is not marked homework. There's no marks associated with this one. This one is for the collective learning across the class. But one of the things I'd like to kind of to look at or think through this coming week is one of the things that is so important to me about like the connection with the earth and like from Western kind of thinking and science, like we always have this kind of, yes, we're very curious, yes, we want to understand things, but there's this lack of sense of kind of connection with what we're learning. It's kind of like an intellectual thing and not necessarily a feeling thing. So what I would like you to do through this coming week is, as you're walking around day to day, look around and find one thing about something about the earth that you get curious about, that you ask yourself a question about, and then you start kind of learning about that. So it could be something like you're walking along and you're like, holy smokes, you know what? I never noticed this sewer here before. What is this sewer doing here? Oh, you know, and then you might find out that that sewer is actually carrying an old creek that used to be a creek that was out on the surface. You can go through a couple of places. I'll use an example. You could go through Trinity Bellwoods Park, and Trinity Bellwoods Park used to be a ravine system where a creek used to come down, and it was out where everybody could see that creek. But when development occurred, they took that creek and threw it into the stormwater system, took away that creek for everybody else to see, and it's kind of hidden in the stormwater system in that. Yeah. And one of the things I'd like, you'd be like, oh, okay. And then there's this new kind of emerging trend taking place, which I think the name of it is really sweet. It's called daylighting. And what that daylighting experience is about is taking these creeks that were thrown into the stormwater system and hidden away from life, hidden away from as serving as habitat for animals, taken away in terms of for people to be able to enjoy the creek as well, and they're thrown into the stormwater system. Why? Because it created flooding risks for development. So it could be that question. It could be actually just looking at a tree and thinking, holy smokes, photosynthesis. What a cool thing. Like, imagine that. Imagine photosynthesis, being able to turn water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight into your food, into your sugars. Like, what an amazing invention of that. When did that emerge? How the hell did that emerge? You could be looking even at the trees. When did trees come into the earth? What is their evolution? Did they start out exactly? Have land also always been covered by trees? Just really trying to bring in things that we don't pay attention to the earth, to all the environment around us. So my challenge to you as your homework is to look around and find one thing that you get curious about the earth, and to either learn a little bit about it or to bring it to the class so we can all kind of identify it and learn, or at least bring those curious questions to each other. So yes, not for marks, just for simple sharing and bringing thought processes together, and to learn a little bit more about this amazing planet that we call home. All right, so now we're going to get into the course for today. And what the topic for today is going to be about is stakeholder engagement. How do you work with people? Just that. And we are going to go start doing a little bit of the sharing on some strategies for how that will take place. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay. So just before we get into stakeholder engagement, one of the things I did want to share with you, because we initially passed through this report, and I did highlight when we were talking last week about the carbon cycle, the phosphorus, and the nitrogen cycle. I did also kind of really quickly go by this one. And I really want to encourage you that if you're, in terms of resources, there's heaps of resources and links in each of the PowerPoint presentations from each of the weekly classes. Again, not expecting you to have to go down and check out all of the different links. Those links are meant for you where you get curious to want to learn more. However, I'm going to say that I really think it's a good idea for everyone to read this report. And why I think it's a good idea for this to read this report is that you are going to be faced with a lot of difficult challenges in your career and in your life about which fights and battles to take on and which ones you just don't have the bandwidth, which ones you have to say no to, because you cannot say yes to every single fight. You will not be able to function. You will not be able to be effective at anything that you're trying in terms of that, because you will spread yourself too thin. So which fights do you take on? Well, you probably want to take the fights on that are really important and that you have a chance of winning. Now, I don't mean that you should never take on something that doesn't meet these criteria. There are lots of reasons to do that, but it's very good to kind of take that into consideration. So I wanted to kind of highlight this because it's a really important study that was done about what makes for successful interventions. And certainly I would say, like, remember we were talking about it, if you don't yet have epidemiological, science-based data, health-based data on the impacts associated with it, that's first. If you have to be working with the health community to pull that data together because it doesn't yet exist, that means that that is going to be your challenge in this project. So if you, it doesn't mean that you don't take on projects where the health risks are not clearly identified. But if that is not the place, then the first effort you're going to have to do is find your partnerships with academia, find your partnerships with the health community, find partnerships that can help you pull the evidence-based data that you need so that you can engage with your stakeholders and get them on side that this is a problem that we absolutely have to deal with. So that's the first step. That's one of the key criteria. If you are lucky enough to find to come up with like the intervention that you're looking for and what you want to take has that health evidence behind it, that is something really important to have in your toolkit of things that help you get to a yes. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have it, but if you have some sort of engagement from government, that is always a good thing. It's the one, if you don't yet have that engagement, then your intervention is going to likely be, how do I get engagement from government on this? But if you do already have that engagement from government, that they've recognized that it's a problem, you don't have to have them saying what they've committed to doing about this problem, but just recognizing that it's a problem. That is something that's going to really help you in terms of helping you get to a yes, this is worth a battle worth taking on. If there's ever been any litigation, that helps. As you can imagine, litigation in terms of financial consequences, reputational consequences, all of that helps to draw attention to this issue, gain support, and build the stakeholder base that you need to get to the solution that you're trying to move forward. Civil disobedience does not hurt either. It is a great way to get government intervention, government high recognition, media recognition to an issue that is being ignored or not given the profile that it truly deserves. That civil disobedience is really important in building that critical mass of support at the larger general base that can help you build the willingness of your stakeholders to move towards a solution. If you are challenging a proposed project to take place, that is always a better place to start than trying to fight an existing project already in place. Once it's in place, it will be harder to change. Once if it hasn't been yet approved, that is a great opportunity to let's just say challenge its approval or to influence its approval to make it so that the interventions or the implications that you're worried about are are less likely to take place. Okay, where industry can really build this cohesive alternative story to the one that you're probably wanting to tell, where their industry's not yet organized, that's also very helpful, because once industry gets organized and they start building their or associations and a membership organization challenging what you're trying to do, that will be a harder fight. Not saying you can't win it, you absolutely can, but it's going to still be a harder fight. And interestingly enough, in the study was they found water issues and water kind of quality issues tends to mobilize people more than air, soil, and land issues do. So things related, people understand things related to the water cycle and messing with water. People understand that. They're less kind of clear on the implications associated with air, soil, land, and also climate. People are still kind of, a little bit not as clear in terms of it as they are with water quality. And I wonder if that has something to do with our understanding of the water cycle and our respect and appreciation of the water cycle on Earth. Whereas we don't tend to have the same sort of level of understanding associated with the carbon cycle, with how soil and nutrients take place, all of those different things. I sometimes wonder about that. But if I can give a plug for any of the resources in the PowerPoint presentation that I highly recommend people read, I'm going to give a plug for this one. And I am going to, give me one sec, throw this link, come on, into the chat so that you guys can have it. There you go. I hope it gets working still. If it's not, let me know and I will hunt down another one. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about, we talked about 2 weeks ago, we talked about how you break down a problem into its different various components, parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you move from problem to solution and thinking that process through. But really what you want to kind of identify is very few people will want to just rehash over and over again the problem. In order to build your stakeholder team of people, you're going to have to identify that there are solutions to the problem that you're trying to address. So really, sometimes you don't have to have all the answers to all the possible solutions that you could bring together with a stakeholder group. That's part of the exercise, that you want to bring a larger team of people together to start talking about this is the problem. We all agree it's a problem. How do we move towards finding solutions to this problem? But there has to be a solution. If you're going to be if there's no solution, I say if you don't think there's a solution, then I would say put that fight on the back burner. But until you can figure out exactly what your solution is that you want to try and advance. You don't have to kind of have all the answers, but you're going to have something of an idea of some possible solutions. And then you bring your stakeholder group together to brainstorm and engage in other possible solutions from a variety of different perspectives. And that is really powerful to be able to have a wide stakeholder base engaged in problems and solution identification. Really what you want to do is then kind of prioritize which do people think is the best solution? Which ones who would take them on? Because if you have a wide stakeholder base, you could find people advancing different solutions all at the same time and trying a number of different routes, and then making seeing which one works, seeing which one makes the most progress. That's always an opportunity. It doesn't always have to be, not everybody has to agree on one solution to a problem. One of the key things is really, we're going to talk about, there is going to be a whole course that not a whole course, a whole class we're going to do on how you overcome resistance to change. That is something that you are always going to be dealing with within any stakeholder group. Resistance to change is always something that you have to deal with. In terms of how you go about doing that, really you want to times about how do we best build these teams? And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of partnership brokering techniques and resources that are available to help you figure out how do you build this team building. Importance of monitoring and tracking results of what you're actually achieving. This is really important to tell the story, and also to find out what worked, what didn't, and what you're going to be doing next. This is just kind of like the solution kind of thinking through of how do I move along this pathway. Okay, so I did want to kind of go into brainstorming. really effective, really important, especially when you have people with different perspectives and different points of view, because you get a lot more valuable input from brainstorming when you have diversity in your group of people who are doing the brainstorming with you. The most important thing to remember on brainstorming is this is not the time to be critical of suggestions coming up. This is the time to welcome all ideas. And there is nothing dumb, nothing, doesn't matter whether it's unrealistic. It might very well be unrealistic, doesn't matter. When you're brainstorming, all ideas are welcome. And this is not the time to criticize the viability of it. It is not time to be debating whether it's possible or not possible. That is not what you do at this point in time. And one of the kind of things like brainstorming really tries to advance is in many ways, brainstorming is almost like, I'm blanking on the name. It's not ad lib. It's when you get together and there's
Improv.
Thank you. Improv. So brainstorming is very much like improv. It's a yes and. You don't go, that won't work. You don't go, no, but what about? You go, yes, and what about this idea? So you want to also have a large variety. Don't limit the ideas coming out. You want to have as much ideas as possible. This is not the time to focus on execution or viability yet. And one of the key things that's also probably the important thing to do when you're working with a group of stakeholders is you want to kind of, the only critical kind of area that you want to try and avoid going into is like far out tangents. You do want to stick with the key question that you're all brainstorming on. So that is one of the kind of key facilitation techniques that you will probably want to kind of hone your practice at, to help keep people focused on the question and problem that you're specifically trying to work on through this brainstorming exercise. Because a lot of the times people will go off in different directions, and that's the only piece that you want to play that kind of, whoa, come back into the group here on that one, because people can go on to different topics and then you've lost the focus of the brainstorming. So in terms of like creating boundaries around brainstorming, I think that's probably one of the best boundaries to try and facilitate and work on, is stay within the key question that you're trying to brainstorm on. It doesn't mean that the tangents that people are kind of going on aren't valuable. They absolutely probably are. And one of the key techniques that might help on this one is just to have another kind of like a line of a parking lot of where you put these cool ideas that people raised or brought in, but is not relevant to the question that you're presently brainstorming on. How many people have engaged in brainstorming exercises? And the theater degree comes in handy, finally. Thanks for the laugh. Could you share some of your experiences on how you found the brainstorming exercise?
I mean, for me, brainstorming is a huge part of being creative, and I like to write in my free time. So if I'm writing a story, I will brainstorm like the name of the character or anything else and then go from there. And then I normally would write out like what's the story about, and then if I like it, I will write down a check mark like I'm doing it, but I'm not. If I write an X down, I'm not doing the story.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's the same, it's not really the same for school, I feel like. But for me, being a creative, imaginary person, I really like to just absorb myself in something and then create stuff for other people to enjoy. And I need to enjoy it as well.
Sounds good. Any other kind of, Bree, go ahead.
Speaking of the theater degree coming in clutch, a lot of theater work. I do something called devised theater. That's what my honor specification is in. And it is literally building from the ground up. So we'll be given something. It can be, here's a jar, make a show about it.
Mm-hmm.
Bane of my existence, so much fun. But it's that idea of like bouncing ideas off of each other. And we have this saying in the theater world of throw the baby out with the bathwater, or don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, of like, are we at that point that we can kill the baby? No, sorry, y'all. It's a little,
Yeah, I
but
yeah, I know
like,
what you're going at. I know where you're going at.
like people are so like protective and like not like just protective, defensive of their
Mhm.
like ideas and their, especially in the creative world, like Sophia was talking about, of like, well, I'm right and you're wrong type of idea. And then there's other times where people really like your idea, but mainly it's because it's similar to theirs.
That's
I've found. So
Take what you can get it on that one.
hey, I'm not complaining.
In terms of your experiences with brainstorming, what did you find that when you are brainstorming with a group, what did you find happens to the dynamics of the group when people have a good experience on brainstorming?
When we're brainstorming at the beginning, kind of feel lost, but when we're starting gathering information and we know we got it, and we can come up with a solution, that's the main point. When we okay, now we have it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't know if this is what you're pointing at, but that like certain group roles end up emerging a little bit. So I don't know if it helps that
Mhm.
I just did a group facilitation yesterday, so we kind of had to examine our group roles, but like someone might be the idea offerer, or someone else might be like the person who can offer their like personal experience with it, or we said that there was a person in our group who was the person who kept us on track and like ended up refocusing us, or like the recorder and stuff like that. So each person kind of
I
ends
like
up
that idea.
assuming a role.
Hmm. Absolutely. That's really a good point. I know from my experiences when I sometimes am engaged in brainstorming, the one thing that I find is that it can really help in bringing the team together and getting past their normal siloed way of thinking of things. It's if you can bring it into a play kind of thing, getting a group of stakeholders or like just it's really about a group of people playing together that builds the relationships between them. And that's going to be absolutely critical for building a good stakeholder group of people who are going to be working through some really difficult times. Leah.
Not exactly the same, but like the experience that I have that's kind of related is that I was in an AI ethics class where it was both like philosophy students and computer science students in the same classroom, which was fascinating because um often you'd have like the computer science folks talking in much more scientific terms, and then granted as well, in this classroom majority of the students were young men. So it was also interesting because then I got to like, I was always very nervous about bringing up my like more feminist perspectives just because I recognized that I was a minority opinion in there. But I had a really great interaction with a professor for that class who said to me, no, like that's the very reason why you need to bring up those ideas, because otherwise this room would lack that type of perspective. So
Yep.
the more like epistemic diversity we can have, the more like creativity can occur within a room.
Well, I'm glad that they were rectifying a gap in the discussions that were taking place there. But
Yeah,
I
there was
have to
some stuff
admit,
that needed to be
sounds
talked about.
but it sounds fascinating to hear those different perspectives between computer science and philosophy people. But I'm sad to hear that there was a predominance of males only on that kind of discussion.
No,
Definitely could.
it was interesting. Like, again, that feminist perspective, like a lot of them, I think I brought it up in another class, but a lot of them didn't think that technology had any like political leanings at all. Like, so the very foundational idea that like any type of like tool has a bias within it was like unheard of to them. So
Oh, interesting.
it was interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, Sophia.
I think when you are trying to be creative, if you're leading a team, then you want to assess strengths and weaknesses in said team.
Yeah.
Because a bunch of times, like, you're stuck with someone who actually does not know what they're doing or feels scared to like ask. So as much as possible, working with people is really an insight into what you can do as a person, because eventually all of us will need to go into the field and work with people we don't really like, and we need to have the capacity to be like, okay, personal opinion aside, I've worked with people I don't like, like in high school, and I really didn't like them, but I had to put it aside, like, we have to get this done, I have to get this in and learn how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Very true. Great. So we're going to go into a little bit of an example of like a different explanation on how you kind of find out like what are the interventions and where, like, how do you choose which ones you think are going to be most likely to be effective. So I'm going to use this example of air pollution. Air pollution is all, like we're going to talk about air pollution from vehicles as part of this one. We know air pollution has absolutely very significant health impacts on people. We also know that children and also elderly are also much more vulnerable to health effects of air pollution, but we're going to focus in on children now because, well, elderly, no, we're going to just focus on the children just because they have the hugest amounts of life ahead of them and probably the highest impacts on air pollution. And the main reason why children are so vulnerable to air pollution is largely because their lungs are smaller, their respiratory system is smaller, their blood vessels are smaller, all of these different things, because air pollution has both respiratory impacts, it also has cardiovascular impacts, and how quickly blood is able to flow through your body is going to be impacted by air pollution as well. Interestingly enough, we're also learning about huge connections between air pollution and diabetes. But I digress. Air pollution has really some significant impacts on kids. So there's a couple of different ideas. So we're going to talk about idling. People sit there in their vehicles, they're waiting for people, they're kind of just letting their engine run, they're not paying attention. It's not like they're trying to be terrible people and release all this air pollution needlessly into the air, but it's just habit and they're not thinking about it. So how do we educate people about the connection between their choices and behaviors in their transportation options and air pollution as a whole? So you could talk to drivers. Let's say you could stop at gas stations and have an intervention at gas stations. That might work. That's where the drivers are. So you can kind of think, oh, okay, let's think about that as one possible intervention. Or I'm going to just try and put two different options out there. Could be gas stations because you're talking directly to drivers when they're filling up their vehicles with fossil fuels and then helping them make that connection. Or you could actually talk with drivers at schools or daycares. And which would you think is probably the more effective tactic to use? Talking to drivers at gas stations or talking to drivers at schools or daycares? All right. And why are you thinking daycares? Those who are thinking schools and daycares are better, what's your thinking on it?
If I can speak up to this, I would just say that like this sounds awful, but like people are much more likely to act in the interests of their kids. So if you relate it back to like health and well-being of their kids, then you're more likely to have success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then for those who thought gas stations are a good intervention, what was your thinking for why a gas station would be a good intervention?
I was thinking that when you are investing money for gas,
Ah, interesting. Okay,
so
yes.
still when I can give you some solution and can discuss or come up with solution that may reduce air pollution as well as your money, maybe that will impact.
Yep, that's a good point. Very good point. So we tested out these techniques to try and figure out which one works best, schools, daycares, or gas stations. Through 3 different interventions, did some evaluation to try and figure out which one worked out well. Interestingly enough, schools were the best. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on some of the kind of interventions and the evaluation that took place. Daycare's also second, gas stations third. So totally get the good point. That's a very valid point. People are spending money at the gas station. They're directly doing that, directly the connection between putting the fossil fuels into their vehicles and moving on their way and building that connection. And people were motivated by cost saving opportunities in that conversation that took place at interventions at gas stations. One of the biggest limiting factors about the effectiveness at gas stations was being the one-off intervention, when you only meet a person once and there's no ongoing connection between that interaction they had with a person at the gas station and their ongoing everyday activities. So that fact that it was like one stranger only at one moment in time didn't allow you to capture and use the ability of changing of social norms or community reminding that is really effective at maintaining a behavior over the long, instigating a new behavior and then maintaining that new behavior over a longer period of time. Daycares were effective because it did meet that kind of goal, that care of the children being more vulnerable to air pollution, children also being part of the people meeting on a day-to-day basis. So they often drop their kids off at daycare on a daily basis. So that ongoing kind of component really did play a role in it. The only thing that made daycares less effective than schools is that often kids at daycare are not engaged kids on these topics. They're just going to daycare. They're not and when you go to school, you're dealing with kids who are older in age, who are doing a lot of learning a lot more, who are better at able to do undertaking their own learnings and interventions. So daycares, they're still effective. And one of the reasons why they were effective is because people's care of the kids, because of their ongoing day-to-day drop-off, because the social norms can change around daycares with regards to people reminding each other that they should be turning their engine off when they're picking and dropping off their kids and all that kind of stuff. But what was so effective about schools, and why schools won on all the intervention opportunities in terms of achieving the change, the desired behavior change, and making that desired behavior change stick, is because the kids were doing the education in the first place. It wasn't outside people coming in to doing it at daycares, which was what was being used because the kids are too young to do those interventions at their own daycares. But it was the fact that schools and students were the ones doing the intervention, the fact that they were kind of able to do it in reminders and have these little ongoing continued kind of every 3 months, have a little bit of an anti-idling intervention with drop-off and parents, made that one of the most effective one of the most effective interventions at getting the behavior change and getting the behavior change to stick. So you can get to see a little bit about different techniques that you could try as you're advancing to try and figure out, like, okay, what's our intervention and how are we going to make our intervention as effective as possible? So some of the kind of things I did want to kind of highlight, again, some of the things that were coming out of the conversations. So a lot of these conversations were about anti-idling and how we advance this stuff. It also kind of led to additional kind of like new interventions, even past the idling, because idling only addresses it when that short little time period when people are keeping their engines running when they're not moving anywhere. But there's other kind of time periods that you probably want to be able to identify where you can impact on the reduced air pollution coming from vehicles. So the first question, one of the key things that would be like, if your drop off and pickup zone or where school buses are hanging out, stop the idling, get the idling stopped in the first place. In addition, you also want to highlight, where is the intake for the school? Are you bringing in all of that exhaust emissions into the school's HVAC and air supply system? If that's the case, and your air supply is close to the place where there's pickup and drop off times, that's not a good matchup. So that needs to get fixed. in terms of actually trying to say, like, what could be done, maybe some vegetation is possible to create some barriers between the schoolyard and that. Maybe there's also some tree planting that could take place. Walking school buses can get intervention to reduce the amount of drop off and pickup times. Really moving away from diesel vehicles towards electric vehicles, so that that kind of emissions taking place at the schoolyard level is reduced. All of these are different possible ways to address the move from problem to solution in terms of reducing people's vulnerability, especially children's vulnerability to air pollution over time. But it goes to show you how even one relatively simple intervention, anti-idling initiatives, can have a variety of different ways that you can move from problem to solution, and then finding which solution has the biggest chance and better opportunity to achieve the outcome that you hope it achieves. Any questions on the anti-idling example and how you kind of move from problem to identifying solution, and then identifying how you test out which solution will be the one that you're going to pick as the one you're going to move forward? No? Okay. So we're going to go into another topic now. And that was another example. We're going to start learning another one on this one. We're going to talk about fracking. And I do have to say, one of the funny things that I've kind of done about fracking. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Battlestar Galactica. Actually, I'm gonna stop when they're did. So if you ever saw Battlestar Galactica, but their version of the swear word that we all know that I'm not allowed to say was fracking. And I thought it was really interesting that that was used as the swear word that they used throughout the series. And I thought, isn't that interesting that maybe they actually were kind of putting a little dig at the fracking that the fossil fuel industry was doing at one time. And I don't know if that's what they were intending on that one, but fracking actually is something that it's one of those examples. You know how we were having this time period of talking about peak oil, and there was the kind of like, people were kind of like, oh, we're going to run out of fossil fuels. And honestly, we're not. Like, we are not running out of fossil fuels. There is enough coal that we can dig out of the ground that we can totally undermine our carbon cycle, and take that off. There's enough coal that we can dig out of the ground and put into the atmosphere that would totally undermine our carbon cycle. And the lack of access to fossil fuel is not what's going to save us in terms of the climate change challenge ahead of us. We have more than enough fossil fuels to totally undermine our survivability on this planet. So that's not lack of resources that we're going to be that's going to save us on this one. But there was this feeling at one point in time that there was going to be shortage of fossil fuels, and it was because of the easy access to oil and easy access to natural gas that was coming to a limiting factor. Then the fossil fuel industry figured out fracking, and it opened up a whole new area of fossil fuels for them to dig out of the ground. And it also resulted in way cheaper natural gas. So before fracking was advanced, natural gas was actually really, really expensive in terms of prices associated with it. Then fracking came in, natural gas prices crashed because there was so much supply that was available to us, and they came down. And that's really one of the key aspects that enabled, let's say all the kind of coal-based electricity generating stations were shut down in the United States. And that was a win, absolutely, for air pollution, absolute win for air pollution. Coal burning is always going to be way more polluting than natural gas. I'm going to call it fossil fuel gas, just because I don't like the idea of natural. And I think that's one of the marketing gimmicks that the fossil fuel industry has been using to make it see it's okay, it's natural, it's all good, no problem. It is a problem. So fracking created this huge amount of supply related to fossil fuel gas. It made it cheaper than coal, phased out all the coal electricity generating stations, or pretty much almost all of them in the United States. And a lot of them moved over to fossil fuel gas as generating still, so they're still burning fossil fuels. I'm not going to lie, huge improvements on air pollution as a result of moving from coal to fossil fuel gas. But from a climate perspective, all we're learning is more and more and more evidence that fossil fuel gas is really not a success on the climate front. And that's because there are heaps of fugitive methane emissions that come from this fracking process. And we do not yet have the government intervention that should, and regulation that should be in place to, one, ensure the fugitive emissions are dealt with. And methane is 21 times more powerful than just a CO2 molecule in terms of its global warming capacity. It doesn't last as long in the environment, but from an immediate climate change impacts perspective, methane is way more of a heating greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide in that short term. And we really do need to be addressing our methane emissions because it has huge implications both on our short and long-term climate impacts that we're going to be experiencing. So all of this meant is that while fossil fuel gas is an improvement from an air pollution perspective, and the fossil fuel interests have been kind of trying to call fossil fuel gas a transitory fuel to help us do this transition between fossil fuels and renewable energy systems, they've been using this to try and keep us on the fossil fuel teat for the most part. And they've been effective at it. They've been very effective at it. But we wanted to start digging, what is this fracking thing and why should we be paying attention to it? So really what fracking is, it's this new technique that the fossil fuel companies found to extract a huge amount more fossil fuel gas from inside the earth. And what they do is they put a lot of water into the earth, and they do it with sand, and there's a whole bunch of other chemicals, which I have to add, no one really knows what they are. And the government doesn't been pushing enough to provide transparency on what chemicals are going into the earth while you're fracking on this one. Now, the government has tried to put pressure on fossil fuel companies to disclose what chemicals are being using. And the fossil fuel companies have pushed back, saying that's our proprietary copyright intellectual property, and we can't share that information because then everybody will steal it from us and ... So this is an issue that there is not enough transparency in terms of what chemicals are being used in the fracking process and what are the water and other implications associated with the use of those chemicals. So what do? Huge boreholes go down, tons of water, tons of sand. It's almost like it's like it's like an earth colonic, okay? That's probably what it is like, you know? Like it's just getting everything into it and pulling out heaps more fossil fuels than it would have been able to do just with water or other extraction processes that were used. So what is the implications associated with it? Certainly air pollution, ozone, particulate matter, silica dust, which has huge respiratory implications. There are over 750 known chemicals used in the fracking process, and 29 that are absolutely known as carcinogens, which are cancer-causing chemicals. Hydrofluoric acid is one of them. BTEX compounds are another one. The question really comes when the water pollution and radioactive water, what the hell means with regards to radon. Radon is a radioactive element that's in the ground in a natural basis. Some in radon has concentrations are far higher in some other places than in others. It's not a consistent concentration across the earth. It's definitely got a lot of variation in it. But it is something that needs to be taken in consideration. And anytime you are disturbing the strata of the ground, you are going to be bringing in more radon out into the atmosphere and then people's exposure to it. Certainly from the perspective of climate change and methane's impact on climate change. And then, of course, this is explosive fossil fuels. There's a risk of an explosion associated with it. It's interesting. There has been some insurance companies who at the beginning, when renewable systems were being put on rooftops on buildings, there was this unintended consequence associated with the renewable systems installation that resulted in people paying a lot higher insurance. And the reason was because the insurance company are like, I don't know, what's additional liability could this renewable system have? Could someone get electrocuted? What if a fire happens? How does this all kind of play out? And it took about, I think, about 7 years where the insurance companies brought themselves up to speed to separate out what was their actual real risk associated with renewable systems in comparison to what was their perceived risk in renewable systems. And at the beginning, because they didn't truly understand what their real and perceived risks, they made all of their perceived risks real. And then they put they added costs onto people who put renewable systems. And as you can imagine, this is people who are probably like trying to do the right thing, and they get this huge insurance bill at the end of it that they're like, whoa, what the hell just happened here? How did this, like, I didn't see this coming at me. And so that created a fair amount of issues. And it's really quite interesting to kind of identify the same thing is happening at present with energy storage. So batteries getting put into buildings and the risk of fire associated with batteries. And we all know it is a real risk. There is a risk associated with it. But we need to kind of provide clarity on the evidence associated with what's the real risk versus what's the perceived risk. And there is kind of work taking place on that front as well to get the insurance companies to create checks in the system to reduce their fire risk associated with insuring properties that have battery storage, and also increasing the consumer's understanding of what they can do to reduce their risks associated with energy storage in their own homes and buildings. But one of the key things that's interesting on this one, it's funny how they often don't think about the fact that we're bringing fossil fuels into our homes and there's a risk of explosion. So that was one of the key questions I remember joking around with at one point in time when they were talking about the higher insurance rates. And I was like, aren't these insurance providers realizing that there's like fossil fuels being brought into this house and that could, explode? And that does happen sometimes. So, it is, again, the same sort of thing with regards to what we see as risks and what was real risks and what's perceived risks. Okay. So this is a little bit of the introduction into fracking. So why is it a problem? In addition to the pollution, what's the implications associated with that pollution? Well, it's going to be going into 5 million, let's say we're going to use the example of California, because interestingly enough, California has probably the highest percentage of its population that is close to oil and gas wells. And I think that's largely because California has so many oil and gas wells, but also because the population is so high in California. And a lot of these oil and gas wells are not hidden away in more very, very far out rural properties, but they're actually where a lot of people live. So that has led to a lot of people being exposed to oil and gas wells in California. In addition, I'm sure you can understand, you can guess that a lot of those operations are in locations where there's a lot of low income and people of color communities. So, and then it was kind of found in over 350,000 children go to school within a mile of an oil and gas well. And then not all of these oil and gas wells are used for fracking or any of that kind of stuff, but they found that at least 217 of those wells are used for fracking. And there's no regulations related to how close a school can or cannot be to a fracking location. And this is not just a problem in California, as you can imagine. It is also in any of those resource extensive areas, whether it be Montana, North Dakota, Fort McMurray. There's also additional kind of other social issues that come from these resource extensive communities, especially with regards to gender violence, housing issues, and addiction. It's a lot of people, largely young men, being brought together into these resource extraction communities, and huge population booms and busts that happen. A lot of issues with regards to gender violence, and a lot of issues with regards to boom and bust of housing that creates huge implications for local municipalities. And as you can imagine, a lot of money, not a lot of time off. And when time off does come, big parties and a lot of drugs and alcohol are a big part of the community as well. So a lot of issues that come along with it, in addition to the health implications associated with the fossil fuel wells. So some of the impacts on the community: drilling causes a lot of noise, lots of lights, all of that kind of stuff. VOCs is volatile organic compound. I'm so trouble talking. Volatile organic compounds. A lot of trucks coming into the community. Certainly, there's been a lot of evidence with relating to groundwater contamination. Some real big growing evidence with relating to fracking and earthquakes. And that has to do with destabilizing the stratas. There's a lot of money that from oil and gas companies that come into these communities. And that money and resources and jobs that come into these communities will have a huge impact in how the community responds to the risks associated with that, with that resource extraction and that economy being in the community. You know, the same sort of thing. It's very hard to get someone to understand the implications if their livelihood depends on it. A lot of loopholes in environmental laws, and this is also a very important part that it's going to be something that we always have to kind of be cognizant of, is that technology changes far faster than government regulations can ever keep up. There is no way that I can see that government regulations have been able to keep up with technological changes. So there's always a lot of catch up that ends up taking place. And you'd think that we would have like a precautionary principle where we don't actually advance anything, whereas like prove that you don't have impacts before you get a yes. But sadly, a lot of our kind of decision making that takes place is you have to prove that there's impacts associated with it before you can get someone to say no to it, rather than the reverse, which is prove that you are safe and then you can get the yes. There's a lot of regards to how looking at the partnerships from public health partnerships are really important to bring in. And if there is no fracking taking place, putting in a ban or a moratorium on fracking is probably a much easier fight than stopping some fracking that has already been taking place. All right. So I'm going to go a little bit into, while we're here, let me just see what, I know, it is crazy that oil and gas waste is not considered hazardous. Oh, wow, really? I was going, Bree, take it away.
So I was kind of nodding along with everything that you're saying, because being from Sarnia, Chemical Valley, and what is known as like Oil City, right? Or Petrolia, as in petroleum. Oh yeah, great time. Like a lot of oil and fossil fuels. We've been told, you know, when we have those leaks, like we're warned, either you close, you know, shut off all of your vents and etc., or house go boom. That's like, yeah, it's kind of like you choose. There's that idea of the noise and the lights, the flares that go off, like the burning off of the fossil fuels, will light up the night sky orange all the time. Amjong Nation, my res, has the like groundwater contamination, and constantly, like for those of you who are in my group, take notes. And it comes from not exactly like fracking per se as we know it now, but the extraction of oil and fossil fuels since Petrolia is 1780 something, so like 1800s. So it's crazy to see the effects too. Sarnia is number 3 in Canada for cancer, and then it was number 1 in 2013 for suicide rates and overdoses, because of those, like that environment that you're talking about, that this type of fracking or oil companies and industry causes. That's when you were talking about the parties and stuff. I was like, yeah, that was my teenagehood. Like, unfortunately, that's just, those are the families, the people that I know, like, especially being from the low income part of town. Yeah, that was my neighbors. That was, I
Yeah.
think about my friend Jacob that I grew up with. That's how he makes money.
Yeah,
So,
it's a very common problem with any resource extraction community. Yeah, it's definitely a huge issue. I mean, there's like certainly, like I remember reading on North Dakota and some of the issues that were taking place there with the communities, with the resource extraction communities, and indigenous, especially indigenous women in the neighboring communities on that one too as well. Huge amounts of gender-based violence that occurs in that type of environment. Everybody struggles with on that one. Everybody struggles, and the community is trying to struggle to try and figure it out. And again, the question is, whose responsibility is that to sort out? Is it really the municipalities or the health unit, or the communities? No, it's really the fossil fuel companies that have to take responsibility for these unintended consequences that their processing or their company, their business results in. So we're going to talk a little bit about building and sustaining effective partnerships. Just before we do, does anybody need a bit of a bio break? Should we take a 5-minute bio break and let people do whatever they need to do? And then we'll come back at 2:20 and we'll talk a little bit about partnership brokering and stakeholder engagement. And then if we do have time, I'd like to kind of, maybe what we'll do, actually, let me just change this all up. Just before we go into a break, why don't we end the class a bit earlier in that one and then give people a little bit more time for groups to get together. But I'd love to kind of do a little bit of breakout groups right now, just while as many people are here as possible, so that you guys can talk a little bit about if you need to talk anything through as a result of the kind of assignment that's due next week. Does that sound okay? So we'll end a little bit earlier, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create breakout groups, give you guys about 10 minutes to sort out if there's anything that you need. If you don't need that time, just take it as a break. But if you do need that time, sort and get yourself organized across the group. And then we will come back. I will bring back everybody into the class 2:14 at 2:25. Does that sound okay? Okay. Does everybody remember what number they are in the class? What group number? So, or should I go dig in and get everybody's groups again and do that? Yeah? All right.
I don't even remember our group numbers.
Okay, I'll pull it up. I'll pull that right up just right now. Give me 1 sec and I will get it all sorted out. Here we go. I'm going to make the groups up. I am making, where are we now? 6 groups. I'm going to let participants choose. I'm going to name the groups. Okay, I'm just gonna open all the rooms. And we will meet back here. I will kind of I'll give people a warning. I will be around if you need any help in your discussions in your rooms. Oh, Bree, go ahead.
Just for after the room's open.
Okay, gotcha. And then I will bring everybody back, but I will be around. If you need any help, just give me a poke and tell me to come into your room, and I shall come into your room.
Do we just join the breakout rooms?
Yeah, just join the breakout room. That's your group that you're working with.
Okay.
And if you have any problems, if it's not allowing you to choose the group, let me know and I shall assign you.
Yeah, I'm just I can't get
It's not letting you. Karen, where do I
yeah.
send you?
Fairy Creek.
All right.
Me as well, please.
Okay.
We're in the same group.
Okay.
Oh, Sophia.
Does anyone else need any help going into their group? Bree, do you need me to assign you?
No,
Does it
I'd like
work?
to talk to you.
Oh, got you. Okay. Himani, do I need to move you to a group? Langa, Rofiat, or Sednig? Nope. Okay.
Sidney is in Sarnia.
Okay.
They are here. I was just texting them.
We are in the same group. Yeah,
Yeah, you
Okay.
can go. I'm just gonna have a private conversation with Gabby.
but I don't know how to join the.
Oh, got you. I'll move you in there, Langa.
It's
No, it's me, Sergey.
yeah,
Oh,
so-
sorry. Did I do that? Okay. Okay.
and I think everybody else went on a bio break.
Okay. Think so. Let me just see. Himani, do I need to move you on there? Rofiat? And Bailey, I know, is on a break. So I think we're okay.
Okay. So
If you want, I can create a side room for us, you and I.
sure.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind that.
Oh, okay. You know what? Here, I will give you my phone number if you want to do it. Just call me. hoping everybody's back. All right. Oh, this is a very interesting point, Tanako. Thank you for raising that. So in terms of actually, do you mean in the perspective of like, in terms of people's connection with nature will help improve the willingness of people to protect nature and rehabilitate nature and help nature do its thing that in comparison to what it did before humans messed around with it? Ah, interesting. Yeah, I definitely would. I definitely think that there's a very strong element of that has some huge potential, and it's one of the things that I think is really important from the perspective of bringing Western ways of thinking and Indigenous ways of knowing together, and bringing the two to be so much more powerful than either one can be in isolation. And I think that's one of the key components. Like that's one of the questions I first asked in the first class. How many people here love nature? And I think every one of you raised your hands. Like we all love nature. And then how many people feel nature loves them back? And there was far less of that kind of feeling. There were people who were saying like, I definitely feel nature loves people back. But then there's a strong tendency we all have that nature, would be better off without humans around. And that's because of the way that we have traditionally interacted with nature in our kind of Western industrialized way of being with nature. But it doesn't have to be the only way that we can be with nature. And that more symbiotic and supportive relationship between humanity and nature is really, in some ways, I think is really the evolution that humanity needs to move towards in order to address many of the complex environmental challenges and societal challenges that we're facing as our populations increase, as our technology and impact on the earth increases. All of those components, it's just not a technological solution alone that we're facing. This is also a technological solution. Absolutely. Technology got us into this problem. Technology is part of the solution that's going to get us out of this problem. But that in itself isn't really enough alone to be able to move people towards the change that needs to take place. And I really do think that better connection between humanity and nature and earth, and appreciation of the value and importance of earth systems is something that's really important to helping us feel more connected to the earth. And that more stronger connection to the earth will be something that helps us all help to address the challenges that we're going to be facing in the coming decades. And it's part of the reason why I put that homework on you, to go around and get curious about the earth. Find one thing that just strikes your curiosity and come back to next week's class and share it with us. You can do as much or as little research about the question or curiosity thing that you have identified for the week. That's not the important part. The important part is the curiosity. All right, excellent. So I will admit I've gone into, the assignments, I did pull the hats out of the numbers, and I did put in the groups the weeks that I have you in there. So if you can identify, if you can look on that one, we're going to be working on that one. So okay, all right, moving forward, we are going to go back to the topics that we were discussing, which is partnership brokering. Okay. So I did want to kind of highlight, there are so many different ways you could try and go about stakeholder engagement. There's heaps of books, heaps of strategies, lots of resources up to help you build up your repertoire of tactics, tools, approaches that you're going to use. I'm going to kind of share a little bit of the resources that are available from this kind of technique called partnership brokering. And one of the reasons why I like partnership brokering is because it's built on the premise that every single partner has assets that they bring to this conversation, that they're all valuable parts of the puzzle pieces that we need to advance. So there's lots of other different ways, but I wanted to kind of highlight, there's lots of different partnerships. What do we really mean by partnerships? There's policy partnerships where everybody's working together to address policy issues, looking at it from different angles, looking at unintended consequences, that kind of like, you know, you're all working together on this policy, the specific policy that you're trying to advance. There's another kind of way of partnership brokering in the sense that you're working, let's just say we're going to keep on the policy. You're working and your core team is working on that policy, but you're using different stakeholders to provide you input from their different perspectives. And that's more of a consultative process. They're not necessarily as part of the research, they're not part of that, but you're really, they're serving to be sounding boards from you, to take some of the learnings and strategies and give you their perspective on it. There's certainly from the public-private partnerships, you know, I think that's like every one of these, chances are every single one of these partnerships or stakeholder engagements is going to have a mix of both public and private stakeholders who are part of it. There's certainly when you're looking at something that is a big geography, you're going to have a geographical kind of range of partnerships that you need to be. It's one of the reasons why I highlight to people in terms of choosing your case study to create a smaller kind of geography, because as you go into a larger and larger geography, you get far more complex. Your stakeholders get way more complex. It just becomes way more challenging to deal with far bigger, geographically diverse partnerships than it is to deal with topic specific and geographically specific ones. In many places, even within individual stakeholders, there is going to be different parts of that stakeholder team who you're going to might need to engage with at different points in times. So even let's say if you're only dealing with, let's just say, for example, we're going to use the coral reef example on this one. You're working, I'm going to choose an island called Dominica in the Caribbean. You could be saying that, okay, you're going to be working with government, but okay, who within the government? Is it going to be at the political level? Is it going to be at the bureaucratic level? Which department would you be working at? Which division of that department would you be working with? Who makes the decisions associated with these types of things? That kind of breaking down into more granularity associated with who is the right people who you're going to need to engage with, who are the decision makers who are ultimately going to make us, going to play a role in whether this intervention is successful or not successful. Don't just consider that each of your stakeholders is one cohesive unit. There's often the need to break down each of your stakeholders into the different, understanding who is what different perspectives there might be across that specific stakeholder. There could be relating to capacity building. That would be, let's say, for example, you're going to bring in health partners, and they're going to really help you on ensuring that you have the health evidence that you need. And they're playing that role of bringing that health aspect into it. It's kind of playing on people's skill sets and strengths. There's certainly with regards to outreach, let's just say from community groups, they could play a really, really, really effective role in engaging and taking this information that's coming from the stakeholder group and bringing it to community members to draw more attention to this stakeholder impact. That community could possibly be putting pressure on, let's say, government stakeholders to become more engaged, to become more aggressive or more ambitious in the outcomes they're trying to achieve. In addition to across government, really what it comes down to internal partnerships, it's really like across different levels of government. You might have to work with municipal governments, you might have to work with provincial, federal governments. Who would be those partnerships and why would they be important to bring as stakeholders? You do not want to create more stakeholders than you absolutely need. It's already complex enough. For each stakeholder, really kind of think about what purpose do they serve in this collaborative, and what's their motivation for being there and engaged in it. And then also in terms of it, not everybody has to have an equal level of engagement in the kind of stakeholder team. Some people can be far less engaged, but they're still part of it and they're still important, but they don't necessarily have to be involved in all the meetings and all the different research that is taking place. All right, so partnering. First of all, a lot of times you'll get people kind of covered up in terms of like, what the hell does this partnership mean? Like, what is it, a legal entity? Is like, there's sometimes lawyers get into it and they're like, partnership has a very specific need. You're going to use you're using the wrong word. And then you get into that, you got to try and adjust it. You got to just really be able to, whatever you call it, doesn't matter. You don't have to call it partnership. You don't have to call it anything. You don't like, just have to all agree on what you're all agreeing that what the goal of this group is. This first part, this like agreement to a shared vision and common purpose. This sometimes people go over this one because it's a little bit sometimes of a challenging process to go through to get everyone to kind of come into the common kind of like, what can we all agree on? But, and it's kind of like a more of an esoteric, maybe a bit more navel gazing exercise that can frustrate some of your team at times too. But it's actually one of the things I highly recommend to put yourself and the group through to find out what is it that we all can agree on in terms of the problem, and can we all agree that there's something we need to do to solve this problem. We don't have to agree with what the right intervention is, but we all have to agree that this is a problem and that something needs to happen as a result of it. And getting that conversation across the stakeholder group is frustrating at the beginning as people, especially as people or relationships are being built and everything like that. But it is really, really helpful when these group reaches certain hills that are really challenging to go on, when conflict arises within the team and you can pull people back and say, okay, remember when we all did this kind of visioning exercise and we all identified this is what we're all here to do? Can we remember, like, look back and think about that and remember about what it is that we all agreed that we all need to work together on? And that kind of having that exercise of shared vision and a common purpose that everybody buys into can really, really help when things can get derailed in the discussions throughout the process. And being able to go back to that to just create some more cohesiveness in the group, because different viewpoints will cause different partners to bicker and argue with each other. And we will talk about that often in terms of it, that's okay. Sometimes that's okay. And we're talking about this resistance to change in a future class. But that's okay. It doesn't mean it's not allowed to be disrespectful. That's again the rules of engagement that get created. But those difference of opinions, those differences in perspectives, those are quite like little pieces of nuggets of gold, because they highlight that you are making progress towards different viewpoints and different possible ways to overcome some of the barriers that each of the different partners are experiencing as a result of it. But it's frustrating, but I really highly recommend that kind of exercise and bringing the group through this kind of shared vision and identifying a common purpose that everybody buys into. We all know that not everybody's going to agree on this whole process, but what is it that we do agree on? And that there is going to be different techniques or different kind of ideas for how we achieve that common purpose, and that's okay. Also, the co-creation, everybody kind of buying into the process, buying into the outcomes. And it doesn't mean you have to all, like, you could be different parts of the team could be kind of advancing different interventions. That doesn't mean that everybody has to work together on one way of doing this, moving to solution. Could find different ways, and then different teams can possibly take different angles. A lot of the times there's also a common commitment that everybody needs to have, that sharing risks as well as benefits. We all have to have, there's risks and benefits associated with any collaborative. There's risks and benefits associated with any type of intervention that you're moving forward. There should be a clear recognition of who is facing risks, who are facing benefits, and creating more equity around those areas. Not one group shouldn't be expecting more benefits than risks and vice versa. Resources, every partner. This is probably one of the most parts that I like about the partnership brokering techniques that are used. Every partner contributes resources. Now, a lot of times community groups, NGOs will feel that they don't bring resources to the team because they think of resources in a very narrow band of resources, which often means cash. And they may not have that to bring to the table, but they have lots of other assets that to bring. They have community groups, they have experience, they have lived experience, they have moral high ground, they have so many assets to bring to the mix. Did I miss something on the chat, or did it get, oops, did I miss anything? Nope. Okay. All right. I mean, the words in terms of decision-making and leadership responsibilities, a lot of the times what ends up happening in some things, and this is really stemming from the contributing resources, sometimes those who bring more cash to the table tend to take this leadership position, and it becomes a bit hierarchical in terms of the partnership. And you want to kind of try and avoid that happening to the maximum extent you can happen. So maybe there's things that with regards to taking different facilitation that different team members play, that there is more recognition of the leadership that each player brings to the team. And what I really mean, it really comes down to accountability. You got to think about what's the accountability framework for our work that we're gonna bring into it. But that's something to really explore and keep in mind. How do you track who's doing what? That the commitments and promises that each of the stakeholders have done, that the follow through on what people say they're going to do, and that accountability. If you don't have it as part of your partnership and stakeholder engagement, that can really undermine your progress moving forward, because people think like, what's the point of this, that people aren't following through on the commitments that they've made. I'm going to go into a little bit more on that. I'm not going to go digging into too much on this one. Really wanted to highlight this is an ongoing effort. In on ways, the circle keeps going over and over and over again, depending on how much it takes to go from problem to solution. But often this circle is something that a group will have to do on an ongoing basis as progress is made. I did want to kind of highlight, we'll probably go into, I'm looking at the time, we'll probably go at the next class, we'll do a little bit more on this one to go into it. But before we go, I did want to highlight, there's all these, we'll go into this one. But if you are interested, there's partnership brokering resources that are linked here. I will be putting this PowerPoint up, or PDF up on the SharePoint. I will be putting it up on Brightspace. And I just wanted to kind of give you some additional resources. There's heaps of resources from the partnershipbrokers.org website. Just wanted to highlight, it's like really great resources to help you with your facilitation on that effort. We will be doing a little bit more engagement next week on the stakeholder, how you go about verifying your different look at different stakeholders in different ways. We are going to be digging into those who are at high power and highly interested people, those who are in high power but less interested people, low power but very highly interested people, and low power, less interested people, and then the other group, the high power, highly interested and opposed to what you are trying to advance. I'm going to put them as there as a separate group, because you have to handle those folks quite differently than many others. They are your opponents. They are the ones that will probably hold you back from moving from problem to solution in the way that you hope to be able to do that. All right. But we were going to dig into that next week more. That was a lot thrown at you for partnership brokering, and thinking about the assets and resources that each stakeholder brings to the table. And that's one of the key, I think one of the key things that I really have seen. The two things that I found have really helped a lot in terms of building common ground and respect across stakeholders is the common vision and the common outcome that everybody kind of agrees that we all have to work on. That helps a lot. It's kind of a painful process right at the beginning of your kind of the process as you're building these teams and building that rapport across people. It's one of the kind of challenging things to do, but it can help you when and if, I probably say when, but we can use if there's challenges that from this different stakeholder perspectives where people start kind of spending more time bickering than they kind of being constructive about looking forward and moving forward on it. That's one area. And then the other area that I think has been really, I've seen help a lot in keeping partnerships from getting derailed is the recognition of each of the different assets that each partner brings to the team, and not necessarily thinking of assets always in the traditional way of like, you know, human and financial resources, but looking at assets in terms of community networks, looking at assets in the way of galvanizing community groups, experience and hearing of case studies and perspectives from community members who are affected. Those are huge, huge assets that people bring to the table that often people undermine, and a lot of times it's the NGOs and the community groups who don't recognize the assets that they do bring to the team. And bringing that, and kind of almost doing an asset map of what each player brings helps to build a lot more respect across the team. I've often seen that happen. All right, that was a lot thrown at you today. Any questions? Ingrid, take it away.
Yeah, you mentioned something about diabetes and air pollution. I was just wondering
Oh, I
what
like
that
that.
was about.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. And I left that tease out and you grabbed onto it. I appreciate that. So interesting. I was shocked at this because I couldn't understand. Like, I was like, what the hell? Why would diabetes have anything to do with air pollution? And it had to do with inflammation. And diabetes, because it is an inflammation issue, and air pollution has an inflammatory response on the body. That's why it actually affects your respiratory system and your cardiovascular system. It inflames your alveoli, it inflames your blood vessels, making it harder to move blood through your system in an efficient way. Diabetes also has that huge implication. So it's already got, diabetes is an inflammatory response disease. Then you have air pollution coming in and exasperating that already inflammatory response that the body is having already. And that creates, exasperates diabetes impacts. It's fascinating, eh?
That was very interesting. So does that mean you could get arthritis too, or get it triggered?
I'm not
Because
sure.
it's
I
all
haven't heard
patient-
that, but I think probably not, because that's more about the joint. I mean, you probably might have it, but probably not as hard, not as much of an impact because of the blood circulation and how important that is in terms of keeping a person's health where it needs to be. I'm sure you probably get more pain, maybe because if you do have arthritis is an inflammatory response, but I'm not sure that it's the joint inflammation is as vulnerable to air pollution's impacts as the cardiovascular system is. But it's a good question. It'd be worth digging into to see, is there does air pollution because of its inflammatory response in the body have more pain implications associated with people who suffer from arthritis? Corinne, is it Corinne? Sorry, I didn't.
It's Karen.
Karen.
It's Karen, yeah. Yeah, with Ingrid bringing that up and you talking about inflammation, that made me think about autoimmune diseases. Arthritis is an autoimmune disease as well, but there is inflammation with a lot of autoimmune problems. So I'm wondering if there's a link with autoimmune and air pollution.
Good question.
And how, because I do have some autoimmune stuff, how I find that it's cyclical. So I'm wondering if there is something that there's a link between higher pollutants and when things manifest on your body.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I haven't done my research on myself to know what the answer is directly on that one. Based on what I have heard with regards to air pollution, the main problem with regards to linking air pollution and autoimmune issues is that we're still learning so much about autoimmune issues that we don't quite know what creates them in the first place and what role the body plays, and never mind what external forces to the body play in that mix. So I think that we're still learning so much more. We still need to learn so much more about autoimmune issues. It's like we're still at the infancy in what we're learning about, autoimmune issues.
Okay, thank you.
It's interesting. I was reading, if you haven't, speaking of autoimmune and the immune disorders, our immune system as a whole, I'm going to just hunt down one book that is really fascinating. And one of the things that they highlighted about it, I'm just going to look. It's this book called, I don't want to choose the one from Amazon. I'm going to choose the one from Penguin House. I'm not helping Amazon out. There's this really fantastic book that does such a wonderful job of helping us understand where we are in terms of our knowledge of the immune system, both in terms of how the immune system trains itself to deal with outside entities, as well as how the immune system tries to tell friend from foe inside the body, which is a hell of a job for the immune system when you stop and think about it. That's a hard thing, because you'd think it would be relatively easy in the sense like everything inside our body is us. But many things inside our body is not us, and our whole gut system would never ever be able to function without huge amounts of bacteria that are outside, that are not us, that are a little microbiome that does all this digestive work for us. And our immune system has to know that's actually, yes, it's not us, it's not us, but it is friendly, not us. And then there's friendly and there's unfriendly, not us. And the immune system has to do this whole balancing act and know what's us and we should never touch, what is not us but we should leave alone, and what is not us and poses a threat to us, and trying to do that balancing act. It's a really great book. Sophia. Oh,
Which
there's
one?
two.
There's
This is
two
great.
of us.
I like that. So Sophia K.
Okay. Don't try to say my last name. People can't do it.
Katsuris?
Katsuris, it's Greek.
Excellent.
My father is Greek. It's really curious that we're talking about autoimmune diseases, because we're going through a pandemic. Still, I don't care what anybody says to me. Oh, COVID is over. No, it's not. Not at all. And there are people who can fight and fight and fight these diseases. And sadly, COVID took them all, killed them. And for the people who are still alive to this day, they have one strong immune system. Like, this is just a theory of mine, but I'm sort of convinced that my mom and myself got sick way before COVID-19. And so we didn't get COVID for a long time. And then, like, it was kind of creepy because everybody else was falling sick. And we were like, not really we never got sick. And it's very curious because if you went through that, your immune system knows how to fight until the bitter end. And I say this as a message, but like if someone has an autoimmune disease, even in COVID or even now, it's really important to keep masks up and mask protection up. If people are saying like it's a hoax, I'm gonna respectfully say I disagree with you. I don't think it is a hoax. We need to protect elderly. We need to protect people who are very vulnerable, just in case. And I like that Bree is like nodding along.
Yeah, there's definitely like, certainly like not all of us are coming from the same level of vulnerability when it comes to viruses or any types of issues or bacterial infections that we're facing. We do not all come from a level playing field. We all come from very different places in terms of our immune systems, how trained they are, where how effective they are. Those are all things we have no control over in the most part in terms of, you know, what our early life experiences, how our immune system got trained, how vulnerable we are, or how much our immune system got derailed in terms of these autoimmune diseases and struggles that people have. So all of these, or whether they're on autoimmune suppressant drugs to deal with their autoimmune issues, which has huge implications in their ability to address external vulnerabilities and impacts to their body. So we all like, there's no doubt about it. We are not at all a level playing field in terms of our risks and vulnerabilities to external things that can come in and come into our bodies and affect our ability for survival. And I don't know, are still people going with the hoax thing? I mean, like,
I don't know, but I still think people love to say we see this a lot in the US, like, oh, Trump won. The data proves otherwise. No, he didn't. So there are people who are very skeptical towards.
And that brings in a lot of those confirmation. Remember, we were talking about biases we all bring that are all part of what we need to kind of think about, and the confirmation bias that, I mean, that is a huge impact in terms, and it will affect the stakeholder engagement that you do. And people, and like it, in many ways, one of the key things that's really important, a part of that collective mapping of the assets, is also the collective mapping of the biases we all bring to this group, you know? And like anyone who says they don't bring biases, they're lying to themselves and they're lying to other people. We all come with biases. We all have a very kind of a set way we think of things, and that's why stakeholder groups are so important, because that can call out a lot of those biases that we all bring to the table that we are either hopefully aware of, but many of the biases we are completely unaware of. Sophia T, I saw your hand up earlier. I know it's at 3. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment. I'm from Hamilton as well, actually. And I know that Hamilton's air is so polluted, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a direct link between like even like Stelco workers and cancer, and like how our air is almost like carcinogenic, and it's like really concerning. I just wanted to like make that connection. Hamilton's air, absolutely horrible. You're really not breathing in anything fresh and clean.
And it's not completely like, it's not all over Hamilton. There's definitely parts of the community. Like I live in the north end of Hamilton, which is near the industrial part of Hamilton. And if you look in terms of air quality studies that have been done, that area of the industrialized lower part of Hamilton, if you look at epidemiological numbers, you will actually find that there's a shorter or like lower life expectancy within people in that area than there is across the average as a whole. And that's a result of the carcinogenic impacts associated with both the coal burning and the sulfur and the impacts of the air pollution from coal. Remember when I was saying that not moving away from burning coal for electricity generation towards burning fossil fuel gas for electricity generation hasn't really helped us, I think, in the climate change area, but it definitely has helped us on the air pollution area. Coal is always going to be way more polluting than fossil fuel gas from an air pollution perspective. And that's one of the biggest reasons, like we use the climate change argument with like the phasing out of coal burning and steel plants. And there's a lot of government money going to helping the steel plants decarbonize and stop using coal. Unfortunately, there's probably going to be a transitory kind of stage. They are going to be use electric arc furnaces, and that's going to cut down on the fossil fuel that they have to use. But they still are going to be using fossil fuels, but they're going to be using fossil fuel gas rather than coal. That's supposed to be taking place, I think, 2027. But thankfully, that will have a huge impact on Hamilton's air quality and life expectancy over the longer term for the population who has been really quite hardly exposed to those industrial pollutants.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And that's one of the justifications for the government to support that industry, to be able to make those changes to their systems and reduce their coal usage.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Right. All right, so have a great week. If anyone does have any questions related to the assignment for next week with the annotated bibliography and the table of contents, let me know. If I do get questions from people, I will throw them up into the share the kind of FAQs, what kind of questions are coming up and my answers to people, and I'll share that in the announcements in Brightspace. And I hope you have all a good weekend and happy long weekend, hopefully. Oh, let's see. That's lovely. That's
It's just a little
lovely.
messy, but it's not done yet. I'm gonna put black to accentuate it.
Nice. Very nice.
I
Ooh,
got a
it's
lot done in
pretty.
this class sitting there
Thank you.
listening. See, I told you. My brain is
Excellent.
a mysterious place. Have a good weekend,
Thank
Gabby.
you, you too. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.